Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the Future of Soy-Based Biofuels webinar. We're going to give it about 30 more seconds here. Let everyone join, get their volume adjusted, and then we'll start. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about soy-based biofuels. We're joined by, my name is David Kubik. I am the biofuels and trade policy manager here at the Illinois Soybean Association. We have three wonderful panelists and a presenter, Ann Steckel from Ardent Strategy. She's a biofuel policy expert. Joe Job, who is the CEO of Sabre, and they represent biodiesel plants. Carrie Fogarty, who's the quality manager in the face of in Cabrasa, a soybean crusher and a biofuel producer up in Gilman, Illinois. And just a little bit about me. Um, I've joined the ISA, Illinois Soybean Association, about 5 years ago in January of 2021, and immediately started on biofuel policy. The B20 sales tax exemption was about to sunset at that time, and the sales tax exemption works to get about 300 million gallons of biodiesel from all different feedstocks into Illinois. So it was very important for the state of Illinois to continue this policy and this tax credit. And in Illinois, our budget situation, tax credits are always, and tax incentives are always very hard to re-up because we continually have budget crises that are happening. But I don't only work on state policies, I work on federal policies too, like 45Z, the 48 blenders credit, and all these other things in between that continually change and have continued to evolve in the biofuel world. Um, but today we're going to talk a little bit about the history of biodiesel, a little bit of history of 45Z, the clean fuel production credit, and a little bit about where soy-based biofuels especially are going to be going. And we are pleased to be joined by Ann Steckel, who's the principal at Ardent Strategies. Ann has been around the industry for a long time. She's worked in state and U.S. senators' offices. She's worked at the National Biodiesel Board when it was the National Biodiesel Board. She has an immense number of different just qualities and experiences that where she's been able to look at this biodiesel industry and renewable diesel industry now. So it's a biomass-based diesel from several different policy angles. So we didn't think anyone better to help present and show our membership what biodiesel policy was to look like in the past and future than Ann Steckel. So please join me in welcoming Ann Steckel to our webinar.
Well, thanks so much for that kind introduction, David. And good morning, everyone. And a really big thank you to the Illinois Soybean Association for inviting me and, really your leadership and gathering farmers, industry, policy experts together for an important discussion like this one. I'm really happy to be here today with Joe, Carrie, and David to talk a little bit more about biofuels policies, both at the federal and a little bit at the state level, and to talk about how those policies have been really important to the growth of this industry. Certainly a dynamic time right now in the biofuel space. 2025 brought a lot of different challenges for the industry, namely because of some of the topics we're going to be talking about within the tax world. Hopefully we've worked through a lot of those topics and the industry would be poised to jump into further production, which obviously will be a benefit to farmers and consumers at the end of the day. I'm from Illinois, so any chance I get to talk to other folks from Illinois, I get really excited about. We still have our family farm back in Illinois, and so this is a really meaningful topic to me, and I'm really pleased to be able to spend a couple of minutes with everyone today to discuss it a little bit further. So if we can just jump into, we have a couple of slides. If we could just jump into the first one, that would be great.
It's presented right now. Ashley, do you see the slide?
I don't, but if you guys do, that's all that matters. Do my other presenters see the slide, or is it maybe it's just me? Okay, all right. Well, excellent. Okay, cool. As the slide shows, we're just going to start off with just a brief history review of the biodiesel industry, much of which everyone knows, and certainly the other folks on the call are very well experienced in. The history and the concept of biodiesel has really been around for decades, but the modern biodiesel industry really took off in the 90s and early 2000s, and it really started because of two needs. We wanted to reduce our dependence on foreign petroleum and to create new value added markets for farmers. And really, the farmers were instrumental in creating this industry. At the time, there wasn't much of a market for soybean oil, which is about 20% of the bean. And so this industry was really born because of the dedication and the perseverance that the soybean farmers put into making this happen. Um, Other feedstocks are used to make biodiesel, of course, but soybean oil really emerged and has remained the leader and the leading feedstock because of just how much abundance we have, the affordability, and the ability to be able to process at scale. So really the connection between agriculture and energy became and really still is the lifeline of this industry. Farmers had a new outlet for their soybeans beyond just export markets. And importantly, biodiesel created a use for soybean oil, really supporting prices for the whole soybean complex. Obviously, early on, there were a lot of challenges in the biodiesel industry. Joe lived that and breathed that, so I'm sure he can speak a little more on that. But it's really exciting to see how much the industry has grown again, really because we've had policy. The policy always hasn't been stable, but we've had a lot of policy that has been really beneficial to helping this industry grow forward. And I would just say, from an Illinois perspective, biodiesel is very important to the state of Illinois. Depending on the year, it's one of the top producing biodiesel states and obviously one of the top producing soybean states. So very important to the state. And then if we can switch to slide 2. I'll move over to talk about the biodiesel tax credit. This is the 40A blenders credit. This is just kind of the foundational policy that really got us going back in 2005 when we had the federal blenders credit introduced. So this is the dollar a gallon credit that many of us are familiar with. So really the idea was simple. You're encouraging more blending, increasing the demand for biodiesel, and really accelerating the industry's growth. And it really worked, right? I mean, we saw production volumes climb, more plants opened, and soybean oil demand surged. Obviously, farmers were a big part of that, and we were able to see a more stable market and stronger prices for beans. The catch, however, is the credit really hasn't been stable, which has been difficult over the years. So multiple times we've been in this kind of on and off scenario, sometimes for months, sometimes for years, then only to be reinstated retroactively. So the on and off nature of the credit is difficult for producers and investors, which then slowed growth and making it harder to plan long term. Despite the volatility, though, the blenders credit really has been one of the most impactful federal policies that we have. And then if we can move to the IRA slide, that would be great. So let's discuss the Inflation Reduction Act. So back in 2022, the IRA passed, really representing one of the largest investments in clean energy history. And so for biodiesel, the big change through the IRA came in 2025 when Section 45Z, the Clean Fuels Production Credit, kicked in. So the 45Z credit is different from the blender's credit. So instead of the flat dollar amount that we had with the blender's credit, 45Z is based on the carbon intensity of the fuel. So the cleaner the fuel, the bigger the credit. This approach was put together to reward producers who can demonstrate they have lower life cycle greenhouse gas emissions. So for soybean producers using soybean oil, there's obviously a huge opportunity. If people can improve the carbon intensity scores, the thought was people would do different farming practices, different processing, different transportation associated with that, that the whole market would work together to try to lower the score. We've run into a few hiccups along the way. Right now, some of that sounded promising in the beginning, and in many ways still does, if we can get the correct score, obviously, for the good agricultural practices that we're doing. It's just been a little bit difficult because it's, many elected officials right now, there just hasn't been as much interest in pursuing some of the climate smart ag practices that had been talked about when the IRA was passed. So that's kind of looming out there. Another difference about 45Z versus the traditional 40A blenders credit is that 45Z is a production credit. So it's claimed by the producer. And this really was a big shift, and it shifted market dynamics a little bit. So, perhaps changing how contracts and pricing structures are set up. Carrie obviously would be able to talk about that better than I. So the credit as it was passed under IRA runs from 2025 until 2027. Now, in a minute, I'll talk about the budget reconciliation, which then extended the credit for a longer period. And then if we can actually just move to the reconciliation slide, that would be great. So reconciliation. The budget process in Congress that we did is oftentimes carries energy provisions. So this year, lawmakers acted to extend and adjust some of the important credits like 45Z that our industry has been using and relies on through the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or the Budget Reconciliation Bill Act. So 45Z did have a number of changes. It was extended, as I mentioned, beyond that 2027 date that the IRA put it in, and it now runs through December 31st, 2029. There is a new feedstock sourcing requirement for fuel produced after December 31st, 2025. So any of the eligible feedstocks must be grown or produced in the US, Mexico, or Canada. So the USMCA countries. And then, as I mentioned before, this is a production credit, so the producers will claim it, not the blenders. And then if we can move on. So 40A, the small agribiodiesel credit. As we talked about a little bit before, this year was a year of great uncertainty in the biodiesel industry. The regulations for 45Z hadn't been promulgated in a way that gave the industry a whole lot of confidence for moving forward and making decisions. So what we saw was a real slowdown where producers weren't producing and then the retailers weren't buying or selling it. So we saw, this year was dramatically different than years past. So a number of folks, Joe's group, Sabre included, we all worked very hard to get an extension of the small agribiodiesel credit. Now, 40A in its entirety morphed into 45Z, but they did keep one part of 40A, and that is that small agribiodiesel credit. And so what that is it's a credit. It historically had been 10 cents. They increased it to 20 cents a gallon for fuel sold after June 30th in 2025. And they extended this credit until December 31st and 26. So that credit can also be stacked with 45Z if you're a small agribiodiesel producer who qualifies. So that would be under the 60 million gallons a year fuel producer, and you're producing with virgin oils or animal fats. So the takeaway for all of this really is that it was a good thing because we did get a little more runway for the clean fuels production credit, and hopefully we are getting the industry back on track through the reinstatement of the 40A biodiesel credit, and it hopefully gives the market the interest, the stability to continue to invest and to produce. And then let's move to the low carbon fuel standard. So obviously, while federal policy is critical, state policies have really brought new opportunities, especially California's low carbon fuel standard. So the LCFS was launched in 2011 in California, and it rewards fuels that have a lower carbon intensity score. And so here's how it works. Every gallon of fuel gets a carbon intensity score based on its life cycle emissions, from feedstock production to final combustion. So if a fuel score is below the state's annual target, it generates an LCFS credit. These credits have real market value, which could boost the price producers can get for biodiesel sold into these LCFS states. California, as I mentioned, was really the first state to kick things off, but now other states like Oregon and Washington and New Mexico have their own LCFS programs. In addition, there's a number of other states, a few Midwest states, Illinois being one of them, that are interested in pursuing a potential clean transportation standard. Depending on what state you're in, they could call them low carbon fuel standards, clean transportation standards, or clean fuel standards. So Illinois is reviewing that right now. I think the key is to ensure that the scores that we get for soybean producers really reflect all of the low carbon and the agricultural practices that we're doing and we're putting into it. So it's still being developed, and a lot of these practices in a lot of these different states are reviewing that. New York is another state that's pretty close. So stay tuned. I think we're going to hear a lot more action on those. Obviously, I'll let David comment a little bit more on any Illinois specific clean fuels efforts, since I know those are something that he pays a lot of attention to and is really involved with. And with that, I will stop and hopefully open it up. I know we've got a lot of questions, and I have a lot of great ideas that our other fellow participants will be able to add. So with that, David, why don't I turn it back to you?
Sure. So Ann is gonna help lead our panel. I'll be one of the people on the panel, but another person on the panel is Joe Job. He's the CEO of SABRE, which is the Sustainable Advanced Biofuel Refiners Association. They work specifically with Midwestern biodiesel plants. So he's looking at representing the plants that are really using our soybean oil feedstocks. He has worked with this industry for decades. In fact, when I went to go look up his picture and grab it off of the internet, I'm finding him talking about the renewable fuel standard on C-SPAN 20 years ago. So he was a lot younger then, but he has been working with this industry and has been on the forefront of promoting soybean oil and agricultural feedstocks into the renewable fuel standards, into the biofuel industry for as long as anyone can. So I'm going to give it to Joe to talk a little bit more about himself, a little bit more about SABRE, just so you guys have a little bit more, get a little bit more acquainted with him.
Thank you, David. Appreciate that introduction. And yes, I was a lot younger then, back on that C-SPAN presentation. I have become shorter, fatter, and more irritable in the service of biodiesel, but wouldn't have it any other way. David was talking earlier about the sales tax exemption in Illinois, and I remember the Illinois petroleum marketers were the biggest when that was first introduced. Illinois petroleum marketers were the biggest opponents of that. And I remember going in and talking to the CEO of that group and asking why they're opposed to it. And I explained, look, this is a credit that goes to your members, not our members. And if your members don't want to take advantage of that, they don't have to. And he was kind of stunned. And they turned around and were supportive of that. And that has been in place and has been one of the most successful state policies that we've had in the biodiesel industry is that sales tax exemption in Illinois. And, we've had other very successful state policies in Minnesota and Iowa and Missouri, neighboring states. And, so the industry was, really, the National Biodiesel Board was a trade association that represented an industry that didn't exist yet, and the farmers came along and invested in the industry, and we had to create it from scratch. And so the biodiesel producers and soybean farmers, American soybean farmers, really created a case study in creating an allied partnership to really create something that produced a low carbon fuel industry from whole cloth. And there's really nothing like it. And we really shouldn't forget about that, because it was really something that is rare and hasn't really happened. And Saber is a group that is kind of trying to recreate and pick up that voice for the two groups that created that industry, and that's soybean farmers and biodiesel producers, and really everybody throughout that whole value chain, from the producers to the processors to biodiesel producers to energy input suppliers to distributors, all the way to retailers and consumers. So everybody in that value chain, that's who Saber represents. So that's what we're doing. Back to you, David.
All right, thank you, Joe. And next on our panel, Kerry Fogarty. He works at Incabrasa, soybean crusher, and biodiesel producer. He's the quality manager there. He is like the public face of Incabrasa, sits on the Clean Fuels Alliance board. He also sits on the National Oilseed Processors Board. And he works with both industry, making business decisions, and he's out there talking to our federal and state representatives to ensure that the soybean oil-based biodiesel gets adequate, equal credits, equal footing compared to everyone else. So, Kerry, I'm going to give you the floor to talk a little bit.
Appreciate it, David. Thank everybody for being on this call this morning. It gives us a great opportunity to reach out to the people that help our business grow, and we are reliant on a lot of farmer groups to continue this business forward. I think to maybe drive home what Ann was trying to reference before, and as well as Joe, the importance of biodiesel for the soybean market and the whole industry. I'll give a little history of how Incabrasa came about and the evolution of what we've seen throughout I've been here since 1997, before the plant actually became operational. Originally, Incabrasa was a soybean crusher only, and we sold crude soybean oil. That started in 97. We were able to do that for about a year. After a year, the soybean oil market was horrible. I think oil was maybe 15 cents a pound at that point in time. Nobody wanted to buy our soybean oil. We fired the plant back up again in 2001, and at the same time, we started building a refinery to help us find an oil that we could market more easily. So we started making food grade vegetable oil at the site, and we would sell that to packagers. Again, that was a small outlet for the oil that we had. We struggled. We limped along for a few years. We actually added a packaging plant at the facility to bottle the vegetable oil ourselves and started marketing that oil to Dollar General is one of our biggest customers. We supply all the vegetable oil to that. But still, even at that, the oil that you can put in bottles is a drop in the bucket compared to the amount of oil that comes out of a 25 million bushel per year vegetable oil crushing plant or soybean oil crushing plant. So there was still we needed another market for the oil that we were producing. Well, lo and behold, and thanks to Joe's work in the early years, there was a biodiesel market out there for us. The owners got wind of that this up and coming new fuel was something that we could look into. We researched it a little bit, and in 2006, we started building a biodiesel plant. At that time, we were crushing maybe, like I said, maybe 25 million bushels a year, give or take. Some years were better than others, but we built the biodiesel plant, and all of a sudden we had someplace to go with our oil. So we had the packaging plant. We could get rid of some of our vegetable oil, but the biodiesel was the real outlet for the vegetable oil. So we began crushing more and producing biodiesel from the excess oil that we had available, and that has just kept ramping up. We started off with a 30 million gallon per year biodiesel plant, and over the years we slowly ramped that up, and currently we are at a 75 million gallon plant. We had to make some equipment additions to the facility, but we are able to process 75 million gallons of biodiesel per year. And depending on how the policy outlook becomes, we'll talk about that in a little bit. We have plans to move ahead with another biodiesel plant as well. So we are moving forward. So we were crushing 25 million bushels per year because of biodiesel. We increased that capacity in 2019, 2020 up to 40 million bushels a year. And we are currently in the process of building a completely new extraction plant, which will crush up to 98 million bushels per year. So we're more than doubling our capacity of what it is right now, and almost more than tripling it from what we were originally allowed to crush. So the biodiesel, you cannot understate the importance of biofuels for the soybean complex. I don't know if this plant would be here without biodiesel. It's allowed us to grow, and it's allowed to keep buying more and more soybeans from the local economy. So there's been plenty of soybeans out there for years. I mean, I think about half of it gets sold to the export market, but we would like to keep those soybeans in the United States and crush them right here at home. And we're setting ourselves up to do just that. The whole soybean crushing industry has actually done that. There's about 30% increase in total crush coming online in the next, 2 to 5 years. So we are heading in the right direction for the soybean complex. So I will take any questions if anybody wants to throw something at us.
Yeah, and go ahead, start asking us the questions. We got a whole bunch of them that have come in.
Yes, I am blown away at the amount of questions we've got. This is so exciting. I mean, obviously it's an exciting topic, but it's a very dynamic topic, as we just heard about too. And hopefully we can get these right policies so Carrie can crush and we can blend and sell and produce and all of that back on track. So in a few different ways, people are wondering how soon the 45Z credits will be available. As we know, there was certainly a lot of uncertainty, which really slowed down the market this year. But Do any of our folks, do you guys have any comments that you want to make about when you think 45Z will be available, up and running? And do you think that what happened within the One Big Beautiful Bill gives folks the confidence to start moving at full speed?
I can take that, and maybe you can add something to it, Joe. So 45Z is actually in place for 2025 already. That, however, there were some. I don't want to get too deep into the woods, but soybean oil-based biodiesel was highly. It got a very low CI score due to something called indirect land use change. That fortunately was fixed in the bill going into 2026. Soybean oil-based biofuels will have a much better carbon intensity score, and it will have more value in the 45Z. So 45Z tax credit is available right now in calendar year 2025. So it will remain to be seen how biodiesel producers will be able to take advantage of that. The Treasury Department is still working out on details and guidance on how to make all that happen, but it's available now.
And if I could add to that, as Carrie said, the ILUC penalties that were really kind of a bogus, platform, that got fixed in the reconciliation package, but it doesn't take effect until 2026. So for 2025, as Carrie said, Treasury doesn't have clear guidance out yet. We're waiting on that clear guidance. And so that has really slowed the industry down. So all of the changes in the reconciliation package don't go into effect until 2026, except for one, and that's the small agri biodiesel producers credit. And that is in effect. That's an additional 20 cents for small biodiesel producers. That is only in effect from July of 25 to December 31st of 25.
So, yeah, just to add a little bit to this, and there was another question that popped up: what was missing from the big beautiful bill? We at Illinois Soybean were advocating for an extension of the 40A $1 a gallon blenders credit. And one of the reasons is just because of all of the complications with 45Z. We are under two different 45Z laws. So last year we were 40A, which is the $1 a gallon blenders credit. This year is 45Z version 1 that includes land use change. The rule, it was passed 3 years ago and the rules still aren't out yet. And now next year is going to be a different 45Z that gets rid of land use change and it's domestic feedstocks only. And that's a lot to transition to without any rules. So there's still a lot of uncertainty in how do you capture the credits and when do you get it? So we still support bringing 40A back, at least as a runway. So then that way, all these plants that are working and using soybean oil get some relief because we have 3 different rules to write for 3 different programs at the moment when you talk about the agribusiness credit, 45Z version 1 and 45Z version 2. And then you have to get to climate smart ag practices. So we really want that $40 a gallon to come back and just give farmers some relief, the plants some relief, and even the government some relief. So then that way they aren't writing rules too fast and they're bad rules.
Yeah, David, and I think you made a really good point. It is very cumbersome. We've got like an alphabet soup full of different regulations and rules that are going on, and it does put a little bit more uncertainty into the market, which is certainly not what folks need at this point in time. So I'm glad to hear that you're still looking at 40A as a way to continue to drive growth within the industry. Certainly after this year, we need to continue to kickstart that. We did have a follow-up question about 45Z and the big beautiful bill and those changes. How do you guys think it's going to affect the market in Illinois specifically?
Gary, you want to field that one first?
Yeah, it's slow to take effect as David was explaining. We got a lot of rules that are all going into effect or kind of overlapping at the same time. So with it certainly gave us the market started loosening up as of July 4th when the big beautiful bill was signed into law. Even though those don't take effect until 2026, the new 45Z doesn't. The market reacted very positively to that. So Q1 of 2025 was very slow. Q2 was slow as well. But as soon as that new tax, the 45Z was signed into law on July 4th, things started loosening up, and now we are back at essentially full capacity here. So
Here.
And then we did get another question about 45Z or some of these other tax credits being made permanent, which I think we all would wish for if we had the ability to do so. But I think the political reality says that they're looking under the couch cushions for all the money that they can find to save money and to fund different programs. And so the likelihood of anything being permanent is not strong. But it would be great. That would be the end goal. It certainly would be. Switching things up a little bit, we did get some questions about supply chain and logistics. Do you see logistical or supply chain bottlenecks that could limit the expansion of soybean oil and biofuel production?
no. It's that simple. Biodiesel plants can go just about anywhere, and you put them in the middle of the soybean fields. There's no logistic issues whatsoever. So I don't see that as a problem whatsoever.
I will say on supply chain issues. So 45Z, the changes to 45Z, one of the important ones was that, so originally it was open to all imported feedstocks, imported fuels, and the changes that go into effect in 2026 sort of ring fence the feedstocks to North American feedstocks. And so it's a North American program. And so in the RFS rulemaking for 2026 and 2027, there was the EPA proposed to include a discount, a domestic preference for imported feedstocks and imported fuels, which Sabre supports that as a U.S. As a domestic preference. So the proposal was that imported feedstocks or imported finished fuels would get only 50% of the RIN credit. So we supported that, and we referenced ASA's position, American Soybean Association's position on that. Although we did recommend that they harmonize that with 45Z, so that in terms of feedstocks, it would be a North American program. So, and ASA was, appreciated that position as well.
Joe, I'm really glad that you mentioned the RFS. We've spent a lot of time talking about different tax incentives and even some state programs that have helped grow the demand for the use of biodiesel. But we definitely would be remiss if we didn't at least mention the RFS because that is a big demand driver. I think we could have a whole nother webinar just on that, and maybe we will with all of the rulemaking that's going on right now. But that actually leads into some other questions that we've gotten. What do you see as the most compelling demand drivers, both short and long term, for U.S. grown soybeans? Sounds like we've talked about the tax credit. Maybe the RFS is another one. Anything else that we should add to that list?
Yeah, I'll weigh in, and I really appreciate hearing from Carrie on it as well. But so the RFS, the biomass-based diesel category, the RVO's renewable volume obligation for the biomass-based diesel category, the EPA actually proposed a number that was bigger than the industry asked for. And it was the largest number that the largest increase that we've ever gotten in the RFS. And so it was almost a 2 billion gallon increase. So that along with the domestic preferences make that a very powerful, probably the most powerful demand driver. And it's the RFS is really the umbrella demand driver, right? Because all of the state policies, the 45Z, the small agri biodiesel, it all falls under the RFS umbrella. And so the RFS is really the demand driver, and 5.61 billion gallons. And the biggest, the biggest factors will be how that ends up, in the final rule. Will they keep the, the robust volume of 5.61? What will they do with small refinery exemptions? Will they reallocate those to the other obligated parties, or will they create what they call zombie RINs out of that, which will dilute the RVO? And how will they end up on um, on equivalence values and the domestic preferences? So Sabre is working really hard on, and we can talk about equivalence values, although that's a really technical issue. And we can also talk about the domestic preferences, which Sabre is working hard to keep in the proposed rule.
Yeah, I just to add to what Joe said, the RFS, the Renewable Fuel Standard, that's the main driver of these fuels. I know there's a lot of talk about California's low carbon fuel standard driving fuels, but it doesn't so much drive the demand for the fuel as just reallocate the demand to California from other places. And one of the things that's kind of scary about California's low carbon fuel standard and the way in which it's written is it gives all these demerits to soybean oil. And it tries to just axe it with these carbon intensity modelings. And, if you even ask the person in charge of the GREET model at Argonne, he says a lot of that is political and he's unable to even control it. The person who's in charge of a model is really concerned about the way in which the model is being politicized. And then California wants to have feedstock bans or feedstock limitations. So we've seen a small increase actually in soybean oil being used there, but we've seen larger increases in this tallow from Brazil, used cooking oil from China that's most likely Indonesian or Malaysian palm oil. So, and those have increased vast amounts more than soybean oil has. So the way I look at it, there's actually been 500 million gallons of soybean oil being displaced out of California because of the way in which they set up their LCFS. Um, in most in most cases, soybean oil is about 50 to 60% of the market, depending on the year. In California, soybean oil is less than 20% of the market. So when you're looking at the RFS as the umbrella, you're looking at California really choosing to push soybean oil out of the marketplace. And a lot of our soybean oil based biodiesel plants don't even qualify to make credits in California at the moment with the way they've set it up.
Yeah, David, I think that you just raised a really good point. We had a couple of questions on this about LCFS type programs, really, and whether the state mandates can make up for the instability that's happening on the federal level. And it sounds like what most people are saying is that, like, it has to be done correctly. We've got this land use thing that we're still wrestling with. So there's a lot of things that need to happen before we feel confident with, those LCFS programs moving forward on a wholesale level, or how do you see that?
Um, it's so far there has not been an LCFS that has been implemented that is pro soybean oil. And there's a lot of people who want to get one in the Midwest. The problem is with a low carbon fuel standard, you have to have people who have credits, who create credits, and people who have to buy those credits. So when you're looking at a lot of these West Coast states, they don't have corn, they don't have soybean, they don't have strong row crop ag organizations that provide feedstock to biofuels. Those states are able to make agriculture the losers. Now, in the Midwest, you have strong ag organizations. So it's going to be very hard to find a loser in those discussions and in those negotiations, because you have now created something right now that you now have to create a program where there's strong organizations advocating to not get the short end of the stick.
Also, if I could add to that, there is a YouTube video of a speech that I did back in 2014. I'm one of the loudest, most obnoxious opponents for the failed theory of indirect land use change. And it is a failed theory because it was embraced. It started out as a hilltop epiphany by a lawyer by the name of Timothy Searchinger, who came up with this theory that if you use, crop-based fuels for biofuels, that it would result in more land being converted to cropland, and then that conversion creating more carbon than what was being saved by the biofuel. And so everybody just kind of jumped on board with that theory and created these models that predicted CO2 from land conversion. And these models were the only thing consistent about the models is that the predictions were consistently wrong. And so, we have to go back, and we now can backcast for 25 years about the modeling that was done on indirect land use change, and it didn't happen. In the United States, we are producing more crops on less farmland every single year. We are losing farmland, not gaining farmland. We're losing farmland to development, urban sprawl, etc. And so the whole theory did not take into account what we experienced over the last 25 years, which is a boom in modern precision agriculture technology that has increased crop yields with less energy inputs every single year. And they did not take that into account because precision agriculture has been a phenomenon that continues to be a blessing. And so I'll stop there, but if you want to learn more, you can look up my 2014 keynote speech that is all about indirect land use change flaws.
Joe, I love it. You're ahead of your time on that, and many other things too. We got a couple of questions, just taking a minute or two to drill in a little bit more at what's going on at the local level. What percentage of soybeans produced in Illinois are crushed in state?
We export 60% of our soybeans. So about 40% are crushed in state. Of the soybeans grown are in Illinois are crushed. Some get crushed maybe in Indiana. Some Indiana beans get crushed here, but 40% is a good number to drill in on.
And then this is an interesting one. What are the major differences between Farm Bureau, Illinois corn, and Illinois soybean on soy-based biofuels policies going forward?
So Illinois soybean, we look at things through the lens of what's good for the soybean. Illinois corn looks at things what's good for corn. Farm Bureau looks at things general Illinois farmer policy. So it's really good that we're all looking at things from different angles, because when we work together, the sum of our parts is greater than what we are individually. So we can work together to do great things for the state of Illinois and for the country when we work together, and we look at all of our ideas and implement things that are pro farmer.
That's a great way to say it, David. And then one more question on the local issues. What local policies should folks be keeping an ear out for?
Illinois budget. During COVID, a lot of federal money flowed into the state. That money is starting to dry up. And that means that the sales tax exemption that me and Joe have talked about and Carrie has talked about a lot is potentially at stake. So we are continuing to push that sales tax exemption. And what that's worth is about 25 cents per gallon. So if you're using a 20% biodiesel blend, you're going to reduce that price of that diesel fuel by 25 cents. And that makes us competitive with our surrounding states. Otherwise, people might skip Illinois and use less biodiesel, use less Illinois soybeans.
Okay, so we might just want to zoom back just a little bit. And this one is about research. What research areas would you guys like different initiatives to focus on about soybean for biofuel production?
Certainly, if we can get more oil out of the beans, that would be good. That has increased over the last 20 years, just with the varieties that we have now. But if we could increase the oil production out of beans, that would certainly be a market that we could research into.
And that's a plant science research issue that and we know that we can because beans have historically been grown for their protein meal, and so there's a sensitivity about sort of diminishing the amino acid profile of the meal, but we can actually reclaim more oil out of the carbohydrate portion of the meal. And if we could go from 18 or 19% oil to 23 or 24% oil by just reclaiming some of the carbohydrate portion. And we know that we can. I mean, we have plant science research that has done that in various varieties. Then that would be across a 3 billion bushel crop. Would be, I don't know what the number is, but it would be tremendous amount of oil that we could put into service.
Yeah, and just those are two great. One more I want to add in is cold flow additives, especially with renewable diesel. We went to look at actually a particulate matter study with biodiesel, renewable diesel, and regular diesel. And we noticed that the cold flow additives that we were using didn't particularly take with renewable diesel. So we didn't really have the time or the resources to look into all the reasons why, but that is something that we're looking more into is, as renewable diesel is looking to potentially take up 80% of the tank, making sure that it's good for the engines and good for the consumers.
And David, I just wanted to do a time check. We're approaching our end date, unfortunately, our end time here. We have about 3 minutes left. I didn't know if we should wrap or do more questions or how we're feeling.
Let's do one more and then we'll wrap.
And this, I'm not sure how we're going to answer this in 3 minutes, but let's throw it out there. This is about exports. What are your expectations surrounding the cost of meal for export? Is this an opportunity for highly competitive meal exports to open new markets? A lot of people wanting to know how exports play into all of this. Obviously, a lot of instability right now with tariffs. How can we handle that in 2 minutes, guys?
I would say there's an entire trade group that's looking into that, and it's called USEC, the U.S. Soybean Export Council, and they are working furiously to figure out, okay, if we're going to start crushing for the oil, we've been crushing for the meal, the 80% meal portion of the bean for ever, and now we're looking at, gosh, are we going to start crushing for the 20% oil? If so, we're going to need to reduce our export of whole beans, crush more oil, crush more beans here in the country, which Carrie alluded to, and then find meal markets for export. And so we got a lot of smart kids working on that. It's called USEC, and they are very vigorously looking into that issue.
Yeah, one more thing is we're looking at ways how we grow the animal ag sector in Illinois to use that meal. If we're going to be crushing more beans here and have cheaper meal, that should bring in animal ag. And if we overproduce animals, we can export that meat. So we can export now soybeans in the form of animal ag.
Amen.
It's on everybody's radar where we go with the meal.
Yeah. All right, we got about 30 seconds left. First off, thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate your attendance. Also, and Joe, Carrie, thank you so much. Your individual experiences and expertise are invaluable. You are great partners to Illinois Soybean Association and all of our farmers across Illinois. So thank you so much. There were a couple of questions on trade and marketing. I think you've given us some ideas for future webinars. We cannot give some marketing advice, so but please be on the lookout for some future webinars. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.